Let's talk about the suspension of disbelief and my thoughts on 2022's The Batman. In 1947, J.R.R. Tolkien released his essay on Faerie Stories, which was written as a lecture in 1939. This essay is a foundational work in my education as a fiction writer and analyst. I use his terminology and analysis regularly because Tolkien was not only a great sub-creator, he was a great critic and analyst. In the essay, Tolkien takes on the concept of suspension of disbelief, offering an alternative term with its own unique definition: secondary belief. In his words, children are capable, of course, of literary belief when the storymaker's art is good enough to produce it. That state of mind has been called willing suspension of disbelief. But this does not seem to me a good description of what happens. What really happens is that the storymaker proves a successful sub-creator. He makes a secondary world which your mind can enter. Inside it, what he relates is true. It accords with the laws of that world. You therefore believe it while you are, as it were, inside. The moment disbelief arises, the spell is broken. The magic, or rather art, has failed. You are then out in the primary world again, looking at the little abortive secondary world from outside. If you are obliged by kindliness or circumstance to stay, then disbelief must be suspended or stifled. Otherwise, listening and looking would become intolerable. But this suspension of disbelief is a substitute for the genuine thing, a subterfuge we use when condescending to games or make-believe, or when trying, more or less willingly, to find what virtue we can in the work of an art that has for us failed. This directly contradicts the largely accepted conclusion by Samuel Coleridge that a successful relationship between sub-creator and reader is achieved by a willing suspension of disbelief. Tolkien is saying that the choice to step into a story means we have already stepped out. I agree with this, and I extend the analysis to say that when we do this, it leaves us in a position to step out again whenever we choose. Tolkien goes on to offer his alternative, an enchanted state called secondary belief. In his words, a real enthusiast for cricket is in the enchanted state, secondary belief. I, when I watch a match, am on the lower level. I can achieve, more or less, willing suspension of disbelief when I am held there and supported by some other motive that will keep away boredom. For instance, a wild heraldic preference for dark blue rather than light. This suspension of disbelief may thus be a somewhat tired, shabby, or sentimental state of mind, and so lean to the adult. I fancy it is often the state of adults in the presence of a fairy story. They are held there and supported by sentiment, memories of childhood or notions of what childhood ought to be like. They think they ought to like the tale, but if they really liked it for itself, they would not have to suspend disbelief. They would believe in this sense. The key, thus, to ensuring the successful relationship between sub-creator and reader is not suspension of disbelief, but belief itself. But because this secondary world is not materially real, the belief itself is not only also secondary, it can only be achieved through enchantment. A piece of fiction, therefore, has the enormous task of not simply convincing someone to set aside their primary world, their adult sense of reality, and step into the story, but rather to use the magic of sub-creation, art, to import the reader into the secondary world. If the reader is successfully enchanted, then the rules of the primary world, the adult state of mind, have no relevance. In Star Wars, for instance, because the secondary world is so powerfully enchanting, while we might have noticed a Motorola phone, I suspect very few of you had your secondary belief shaken by the classic Shure 55 microphone attached to this droid's face. So now, let's talk about how I was enchanted by 2022's The Batman. First off, Remember this quote from Tolkien's essay about readers who suspend disbelief. If they really liked it for itself, they would not have to suspend disbelief. They would believe. I like Batman. Not only do I like Batman, I like The Long Halloween and Batman Year One, the primary graphic novels that influenced both the script and the aesthetics of the film. Both of these elements are key to securing secondary belief. So we already start off great. I want to believe. I do not need to be persuaded to believe that a man in a batsuit can exist logically in a secondary world. However, that doesn't mean I'm locked in. The film still has to cast a spell. My desire to be enchanted is not enough to secure and maintain my belief. The ritual is critical. The Batman was able to do this to me first and foremost through its opening sequences. We open with a bright red title, lightly shadowed and scored with Ave Maria, a well-known prayer that will provide a through line. This transitions to an unsteady POV shot from a heavily breathing voyeur, his binoculars fixed on a magnificent neo-Gothic building. Choosing Two Temple Place, a neo-Gothic building in London, was an excellent choice for the mayor's mansion because Batman was modern Gothic. Neo-Gothic was a 19th century revival of a medieval architectural aesthetic. The aesthetic for the Batman is in a similar vein. It is a 21st century revival of a modern Gothic aesthetic and philosophy. In the 1930s, modern Gothic was influenced by Lovecraftian horror, psychoanalysis, and economic depression. And when Batman first appeared in Detective Comics in 1939, those influences were as bright as the hero was dark. In the 1940s, the Batman aesthetic began to integrate Art Deco and Art Nouveau styles. By opening the film with a neo-Gothic building, however, we are informed pretty quickly that the film is throwing back to an original modern Gothic aesthetic that is used in the comic Batman Year One. We have been instantly established in the core aesthetics of this secondary world. Now, back to the POV. Entering this story through the eyes of a voyeur provides an authentic transportation because we as film viewers are the voyeur. We are the watcher. Our eyes are fixed on the costumed boy in the window. It is our heaving breath that betrays our excitement to find out what happens next. The costumed boy goes on to roleplay the murder of a suited man, whom we can easily deduce is his father. Then the man rises from the floor, and the boy returns to hug him, revealing the most important trade tool of the trick-or-treater, a plastic jack-o'-lantern candy bucket. It's Halloween! Halloween is the one day of the year when the unreal coexists with the real. Halloween is a collective sub-creation, a massive communal role-play, a collective game, a fantasy agreed upon. Costumed heroes are not only normal, believable, and appropriate to Halloween, they are a staple. There must be a Batman on Halloween. Further, there must also be horrifying violence on Halloween. And what happens in this first act? There's horrifying violence and a Batman. Now, I talked about how we entered this secondary world through the eyes of a voyeur. In the next scene, we enter the house, sprung from the voyeur and into the secondary world as if we belonged, merely part of the atmosphere, an uninvolved specter there only to observe. And from behind our suited unnamed character, we watch the news, the facts, something mundane, familiar, and real. Gotham City is in the middle of a contentious mayoral election. We understand that, like the neo-Gothic and the modern Gothic traditions, this is a new Gothic, one with flat screens and American democracy. Thus, we are reassured that familiar technology and systems have their place in this sub-creation. In this 21st century alternative universe, modernity is Gothic and has more eldritch horror to its cultural psychology than our world. This is confirmed by the sudden appearance of a disturbing and unfamiliar-looking intruder, whom we easily deduce as the voyeur we briefly shared bodies with. He is a weirdly masked yet modernly bespectacled specter who attacks the mayor with extreme rage and an unfamiliar knife-like weapon, the score escalating to psycho levels, shrieking as violently as our killer dispatches the mayor. A melancholy vocal melody of Ave Maria settles us as the horror gently continues. In the next scene, we make a huge transition from the horror of the first scene. Batman provides a voiceover monologue that sounds like a professional log mixed with a diary entry. He draws our attention to the nature of the city and the influence of Halloween. He talks about how even among the costumed, there is another element operating in disguise. 2 levels of disguise. Sub-disguise. And then he says, but I'm there too, watching. Just like us, he's a voyeur. And he goes on to discuss the consequences of this. And during it, we watch him move in the crowd in his own sub-disguise. He's not in the Batman costume, but a street costume. He then goes on to describe how his primary disguise makes him an ever-present specter for the element, which is a long-standing theme in Batman. He's the crook's boogeyman. Indeed, we go on to watch a costumed crook, who fits in perfectly naturally despite being costumed, experience a fear of the shadows that perhaps the bat waits within in his own costume, which would also be normal. There should always be Batman on Halloween. But that's not enough for this production to ensure that I have been sufficiently enchanted to believe that costumes are more normal in Gotham City. They show us that Gotham is strange. It's a dystopia in the tradition of the modern Gothic, which you may remember developed during the Great Depression. The population deals with this drug and crime haunted dystopia in part through aesthetics. An example is the roving violent gang that paints themselves like Mad Max war boys. It's established in this world that even independent of Halloween, theatrical disguise occurs in a systematic way. And that's why it's this roving gang that Batman accosts, not the mundane crook wearing a Halloween costume. Batman has assumed a theatrical disguise because his targets have also embraced the theatrical. He, as we know, inspired further theatricality in the Riddler, showing how aesthetics are culturally infectious. Now, if this theatricality is normal, then why threaten it by putting it into a 21st century technological environment that would seem, in our world, to find a Batman incredibly strange? However, the culture of the Gotham citizenry is less theatrical because of their economic and status insulation from the street-level consequences of the dystopia. Civilians and authorities have privileged access to normalcy. When Batman arrives at the mayor's house at the request of Gordon, he is met with stares and disbelief by all of the cops, who are attired in late 1930s, early 1940s style New York police uniforms, complete with the hats. The cops are not happy to see Batman. He has a negative relationship with them throughout the whole film. Gordon is the only cop who sees his potential, and throughout the film we see how that threatens his position in a corrupt and status quo police department. To these cops, the Batman is strange. They do think it's weird he wears a costume. That's why the commissioner says to Batman's face, "This must be your favorite night of the year, huh, pal? Happy fucking Halloween." Now, we can split hairs on things like his muscle car, which I found acceptable because it looked so homemade. But overall, this film successfully enchanted me because it firmly established its aesthetics and philosophy in the modern Gothic. The Gotham dystopia is highly theatrical, and agents of the status quo do in fact think a guy in a batsuit is super weird. Secondary belief is a deeply personal experience, and each viewer or reader has different requirements for enchantment. No film can enchant everyone. What I hope is that we as viewers can experience that enchantment more often by approaching a piece of media open to enchantment rather than by suspending disbelief.